The Team House with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
That's awesome. Super cool. So, Bill, I'd really like to hear about I think you said it was one of the first big investigations you got involved in, which was a counterfeiting case that involved all kinds of different players and North Koreans and all sorts of stuff. I'd really like to hear the story behind that.
So that case was really unusual for the Secret Service because a lot of cases, the Secret Service was not sort of set up or geared to work that type of case. It was more of an FBI type case. And the Secret Service does really good investigations, but they're really not set up for a long-term multinational investigation involving intel agencies. So I got to the Washington field office in 2002, and this is a true story, man. So I got there in November 2002, probably March of 2003. I just was in the office one night. I was assigned to an investigative squad, and it was probably almost 5 o'clock, and my boss at the time, he just leaned out. Who's out there? Gage, you're out there. Come in here. And nobody else was there. And he came in. I walked into his office, and he said, "Hey, I just got a call. You need to call this lady at Main Justice. There's some kind of case they want some Secret Service expertise on, and you're going to have to get an SCI clearance, and you need to give them a call. And apparently, this needs to be done ASAP." And I think it was like a Friday, man. And I said, "All right, I'll get to it on Monday." And so Monday came around, and I made sure, and if you already have and I don't want to get into the weeds, and I'm not a clearance guy, man, but if you have a top secret clearance, that the SCI is like another level. You have to sit through another briefing. And so I sat through an SCI briefing and got my clearance, called this lady at Main Justice. And what we say at work, what had happened was, Bush had given his big speech on the axis of evil, right? North Korea, Iran, and Iraq. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Was that the axis of evil? Okay.
Yeah.
So there was a National Security Council meeting, and they were really concerned about North Korea. Kim Jong-il at the time was sort of holding the world nuclear hostage. And they went around the room at this national security table, and they said, "Listen, this country's currency is not traded on the world market. You can't go get North Korean, it's not won, I think it's yen. I don't remember what the North Korean currency is, but you can't get it on the world market. It's not publicly traded. How is this regime being funded?" And they said, "It's illicit activities. They're counterfeiting U.S. currency. They're counterfeiting pharmaceuticals and arms trades." And so the National Security Council said, "Well, if they're counterfeiting U.S. currency, why aren't we investigating that?" And it kind of went around the table. Nobody had any answers. And so the order came down from essentially the president and his staff. What's going on with the counterfeiting of U.S. currency? Well, buried in the bowels of the Secret Service was this dusty old counterfeit case from 1989 that turned out the Secret Service had been investigating for years. So in 1989, at the Bank of the Philippines in Manila, long before, and things have probably changed now, but at the time, some of these foreign banks did not have very expensive money counters. And so tellers would sit here and count U.S. currency. And the $100 bill is the most commonly traded currency in the world, the U.S. $100 bill. And so this poor Bank of Philippines cashier, she comes across this bill and she says, it just doesn't feel right to me. Mm-hmm. Something's up with this. And the way it worked at the time was she put it in a stack of counterfeit bills, and it made its way back to Secret Service headquarters. This was 1989, and the Secret Service has the world's best document and or counterfeit currency examiners, and they examined the bill. Hey, this is a 100% legit bill. They sent it back.
Wow.
And so every couple months, these bills started coming back, and somebody at the Secret Service, this was like 1990-ish, said, let's take a better look at this bill. And the way the money is printed at the Bureau of Printing and Engraving, it's pretty fascinating. You can read about it, you can take tours. They actually have these engravers that take these plates and they hand carve them, okay, into the plates. And when they hand carve them, they make these things that the Secret Service calls defects. And I'm really getting into the weeds here, guys. It's like, I'm really wonky, man.
But it's fascinating.
Okay, so the engraver will make a defect, not purposely, but it's just the way he engraves when he like is touching the metal, and it could be a little tiny piece and it's impossible to replicate that. And the Secret Service calls them defects, and they'll have them all over the bill. So sometimes there have been like 4 or 5 what we call defects. And so when you're examining a bill as a Secret Service agent, you know what the defects are. You can look and be like, yeah, that's counterfeit. It doesn't have the defect. And so they examine these bills and they're like, yeah, wait a second. It's printed on the same paper. It has the same ink, but it doesn't have these defects. And so an investigation was started, and this investigation ran all the way through to 2003 when I got assigned, and they had agents chasing. At the time, there were in the late 80s and 90s, there were a lot of Hezbollah guys passing these bills. So the service was chasing these all over the Bekaa Valley. There were a lot of CIA assets trying to figure out the source of these bills. And in the mid to late 90s, the Secret Service discovered that the president of the IRA, this guy named Sean Garland, who was a well-known IRA terrorist, had been passing these bills and had a whole crew of people passing these bills. And so several intel agencies began tailing this guy, Sean Garland, and he would make trips to Russia and to North Korea and get packages of these bills and then go to Europe and launder the money to then fund IRA activities. And listen, I had no business working this case at all. Zero, man. I mean, this should have been like a really senior agent. I just happened to be in the office late, in the afternoon, and it somehow, how the government works, bureaucracy, it just filtered down to me. And so I started working this case with the 2 U.S. attorneys or assistant U.S. attorneys. I don't want to give their names here. One is retired. One is still an active U.S. attorney or assistant U.S. attorney. Phenomenal, consummate professionals. Unbelievable national security experience. One of them was the lead prosecutor on the Robert Hansen case. And they really taught me how to work a case and getting evidence. The 3 of us spent days at the CIA going through diplomatic cables and just to keep the listeners, so I don't bore them, but eventually after many trips overseas, I went to several countries, worked with several foreign intel agencies, the CIA. We had to coordinate with all these U.S. government agencies. Some of the guys, we had a informant. I'm not going to give up his name or what country he's from, but this guy was a really highly placed informant. If they found out who this guy was, he'd be killed. Gave us some information on where Sean Garland was. And so one of the highlights of my career, man, I was sitting in a command post and I watched the SAS take down Sean Garland in Belfast, which is, a lot of people think Northern Ireland is actually a separate country. It's not. It's part of the British Commonwealth. And so the SAS, a couple of these guys sat in a pub drinking beer most of the day, waiting for him to show up. And he showed up at a certain place and time, and I watched the SAS do a takedown. And so he was arrested. He ended up making bail shortly thereafter. He went back to Dublin, and you can go on his website, seangarland.org. He died last year, maintaining his innocence. But one of the cool things about that case was it was the first ever indictment of the Republic of North Korea, the DPRK. It's the first indictment of the DPRK being involved in illicit activities. And you can Google the indictment. Very proud of it. We did great work. I had a great partner. I'll give his initials, Gage, if you're listening. Great dude. Him and I worked together on that thing, man. And we had a lot of good times, a lot of wild stories of stuff we did on that case. We were in trouble all the time. But it was really cool. We flew some people to the United States, some informants, some intel assets from MI5. We had another asset from MI6 that flew over. It was the first time an MI5 and MI6 asset testified in a U.S. court. Unbelievable. We had to arrange security for these guys. It was really cool. But when it was all said and done, we got an indictment. Sean Garland died. He was stuck in Dublin. He could not leave. And yeah, so that was a case, man. I worked that all the way up till I got to CAT.
What were you getting in trouble for? Or who were you getting in trouble with?
So my partner, JH, we were in real uncharted territory. I mean, some of the stuff we were doing, nobody had, in the Secret Service at least, and the FBI for that matter. I mean, according to the people, the assistant U.S. attorneys we work with, no intel assets had traveled to the United States to testify in a U.S. court. And so, him and I were whatever the saying is, I've heard different versions, but ask forgiveness first, or ask forgiveness later kind of guys. And we just did what we thought was right. And so, yeah, I mean, we were doing, we would meet with diplomats, man. We would meet with a U.S. ambassador to Ireland. Somebody would call us and say, hey, can you fly over here and meet the U.S. ambassador to Ireland? And we would be like, he wants a briefing on the case. We'd be like, yeah, we'll be over there. We'll fly. And we'd go over there and meet this guy. And we'd give the ambassador a briefing. And then we'd get in trouble that we didn't notify, Secret Service supervision.
Right.
Be like, well, listen, man, I mean, and, the funny thing was when some of these assets came over to testify, I'll never forget this. We had jumped through all of these hoops to get this U.S. Or this foreign intel asset to testify in U.S. court. We actually had 3 of them. And one of them who was flying over, it was a Friday afternoon because a lot of these flights over there leave at night so that they land here in the morning. He had loaded up his flight. He was over the Atlantic Ocean, and it was 5 o'clock DC time. And they're ahead of us, so whatever time he is over the Atlantic, my partner JH and I mean, we're packing up, getting ready to leave, because he was the asset was going to land. He was going to have the weekend, kind of Saturday, Sunday, to do his thing, and then we were going to brief him, and he was going to testify before the grand jury on Monday. The Secret Service supervision comes to us at like 5 o'clock. We're literally walking out of the building. Hey, this is a bad idea. We don't want this guy to testify. And we're like, listen, this is like a hurricane off the coast, man. This thing is like in motion. We can't stop it. And, those kind of things. So we were always in trouble for something. And it ultimately ended up in an indictment. And him and I did great work. He's still in federal law enforcement. That's why I wouldn't give his name. But bang up guy. We had a lot of good times. He's a great investigator.
What was their justification for not wanting you to bring... if the Foreign Intel Service itself doesn't have a problem with it, or, gave him reasonable cover or whatever.
Right. Dave, I'm sure you or Jack never experienced an officer in the military that never wanted to threaten their career. So these bureaucrats, these comfy GS-14, SES-1s, and the Secret Service, when, and my partner and I were great. We were briefing our supervision all along the way. This is what we're doing. This is what's happening. And then when it comes time and it finally gets up to somebody, I don't want my career threatened because these 2 yahoos who are GS-13s think it's a good idea. So that's why. They didn't want their career threatened. But of course, oh man, when we got this indictment, Dave, these guys,
all the credit.
The supervisors, look what we approved. Oh my God, this is incredible. And so that's how it goes down.
I think it's so awesome. It's like something out of a Tom Clancy novel on one hand, but it's like the whole thing kicks off because a Filipino woman in a bank in Manila is feeling $100 bills, and she's like, "This doesn't feel quite right." And she sends it to the Secret Service ultimately, and they're like, "Nah, checks out, honey. It's good." And it's just years later that the bureaucracy catches up, like, nah, something's going on here. And because of 9/11 and George W. Bush's speech, now there's this renewed emphasis on counterfeiting.
Renewed emphasis. And it was funny because I eventually got on CAT in 2007, and we can get into that. But 2008, 2009, and this happens, man, I'm telling you, and I'm not a foreign policy guru. You know, I try to keep up. I do a lot of reading. I was a history major at college, but every so often, I'd be on CAT and I'd be in a motorcade or I'd be sitting outside wherever the president was, and I'd get this phone call. There would be this renewed interest in the case. It's like people get interested in North Korea when they're testing nuclear weapons,
right.
And then they just forget about it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's more interest. What's going on with this case? And so that's, yeah. And there's some really classified, highly classified portions of the case that I obviously can't get into. But yeah, I was lucky to be a part of that thing. It was really cool.
How did you guys connect this kind of cold case, you know, that had been floating around for a while to your case and the whole North Korea thing?
Well, a lot of people didn't believe, a lot of people thought